Lan Xue of Citigroup. She's one of the top-ranked analysts around on China, at least according to Institutional Investor magazine. And Lan, I want to bring up a viewer email at this point. We have Will writing in asking, what year do you think 2010 will be most like for Hong Kong and China stocks when looking back at history? He says, remember back in 2004, will it be like 2004 when stocks rose until March, then had a significant correction, then finished the year at the highs that they reached in March? So I guess in other words, Lan, is it going to be a rally, then a sell-off, and then a rally once again?
I think actually it's very similar to 2004, but I think we are in the correction mode already, given that the tighten in this year happened earlier in 2004, where we had our first rate hike, RR hike, in March. That's why it's where the sold off is. And now we had the RR hike already, so we are in the mood of selling off already. But rather is that I think the absolute downside from here is going to be very limited. I think we are going to enter a stage where the market is likely to consolidate for a while, stay very tight range bound trading, and we will wait for the banks to put recapitalization beyond us. In particular, I think the market will be waiting for the Agricultural Bank of China's IPO, which will be very significant in size and which will probably come to a discount, respectable discount to the existing banking sector. And after that, we believe the market will move higher at the back of the bank stocks will start to outperform.
Okay, so let's get, I guess, get numbers on this. How much higher will the Hang Seng Index trade upwards, and break it down into the H shares, those Chinese mainland companies?
I mainly look at the H share market. We are still looking at the H share market to reach somewhere between 14,000 to 15,000 by the end of 2010.
So not too far away from here.
Not too far away. I think where we are going to see is, actually we corrected. We are now, I think, below 12,000. And potentially we see another 15 to 20% rebound from where we are.
Okay, well, let's talk about stock picks then, shall we? Because the last time we were here, you talked about banks. You've been talking about banks for a long time, and a lot of domestic plays in China as well. So going forward, you know, what are the top picks for the Chinese market? Can you distill it for us? Maybe top three?
I think, basically speaking, is for the foreseeable future, given that the overhang of the recapitalization, we prefer insurance over the banking sector.
Interesting.
And actually, for the time being, we think the telecom, in particular China Mobile, looks very, very cheap. And given how much it has underperformed in year 2009, we see a respectable rotation into China Mobile for the foreseeable future. And also, what we believe is PetroChina, from an energy stock perspective, looks interesting.
Oh, you're going with the big caps this year?
I think for the time being, we are going for the big packs. And mid cap still looks very interesting on a medium-term horizon. But at this moment, given the jittery in the market, we believe the large market cap probably are going to be more defensive, given they are very, very reasonable from a valuation perspective. But at a certain point of this year, we would want to advise clients to move decisively into a overweight position in banks, because ultimately what's going to help this market to break out are the bank stocks to break out.
Okay, and what's going to help the bank stocks to break out? You mentioned the Agricultural Bank of China IPO.
I think what we're seeing is that you look at the experience of the Australian banks and Japanese banks, and recapitalization always puts an overhang. But the moment they tell you how much, when they are going to do this, market gets beyond that and the bank stocks start to outperform. So what we are waiting for is the listed banks to give us the detailed plans of how much they need to raise and how they are going to raise it and when they are going to do it. And also, on the other hand, we are looking at Agricultural Bank's IPO timetable, because we think it's going to be a huge IPO, which will put some technical overhang on the existing market. But once this is done, I think we are going to go beyond that. Yeah,
and it's a positive across the board, Lan Xue. Can you just throw a stone and hit a bank and say, I'll buy into that bank stock, or are there specific names that will outperform?
Overall, clearly, I think the banks, which bank is a very macro call. So that means is that relative performance is only a very periodical situation. You do not have a very, very sustainable outperformance in one stock compared to the other. In particular, large banks in China are very similar in quality to a large extent. So what we are looking at is, for the time being, we still have CCB is our top pick, but potentially where we can see is BOC to catch up.
Okay, and is your least favorite pick in this sector Bank of Communications?
We think it's still relatively on the expensive side.
Is it just a little expensive?
Yes, it's a bit more expensive, but entire banking sector now looks much, much more reasonably valued.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because let's talk about the property sector, because from your property analysts are a bit lukewarm on the residential space these days. I mean, you know, we've been hearing about this possible bubble on the mainland in the property sector, but here in Hong Kong, things seem to be firing along on all cylinders, up 30% for market prices, and this is like the highest gains that we've seen globally. So, you know, what's the outlook on the property picks here?
I think what we are looking at the property side is that from a year-on-year volume comparison perspective, we are going into the most difficult part of this year because we had a very unusually high base in first quarter of 2009, given the government started to lend very aggressively in January. And also is that this year we are unfortunately hit by a very cold weather, and also there is policy uncertainties given the government clearly is trying to rein in some of the runaway property price trend. So I think is that for the foreseeable future, we could see volume to decline double digit, even 20-30%. But nevertheless, is we believe the government policy probably is not going to be enough to deter people's desire to buy property. In particular, China will firmly move into a negative real interest rate environment very, very quickly. And when regard to Hong Kong, Hong Kong clearly, in particular at the high end of the market, is a very different, a very interesting story because you are looking at a very, very small city where you have a large country on the side and just a little bit of the flow of the top-end buyers from China going into Hong Kong. That's more than enough for this market to handle.
Lan, we got to go. Very interesting.